Greetings, this is Content Evolution New World. Delighted to have you with us. Mike, my co-host, is on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. And today we're going to talk about Nvidia. And Mike, we've both been tracking Nvidia for a while, haven't we?
Yeah, back in the day, remember a few years ago when the headlines were, "What's Nvidia going to do when the video game and game player market is completely saturated?
Yeah,
Where's their runway? What's their runway?"
as they say in business school, it's time to pivot, right? And they certainly did tack into one of the most dynamic trends that we have, supplying the chips that drive a lot of the training for AI these days. So Jensen Huang has done a remarkable job. I think the question on the table for all of us today in our discussion is, given just the history of business, how long will a company like Nvidia be allowed through market forces to be a quasi monopoly, right? And there's a lot to discuss here. And I just want to make sure that I reinforce what I said in the invitation note, that this discussion is in no way intended to be market advice. Okay, that's not the nature of our, right? So we're not giving investment advice here. No matter what we discuss, you cannot take it as, go, make a, invest your money in a particular way. That's not the purpose of this call. And we're not qualified, to do it, right?
Why is it that statements like that always make me want to go invest right away?
Well, that's fine, as long as it's not a result of what you're,
Don't quote us
from our lips, okay, or anyone else.
Guys, number one, when will we have the investors call? And number two, if you didn't get in and buy Nvidia and market forces bring any competition, who is going to be the next big player? I mean, could we have any day?
Well, I mean, I would observe that there are many, many startups that are machine learning and AI related, right, to be able to optimize processing. There is a conversation, an active conversation about the combination of quantum computing and AI, all right? That would be, if there was a breakthrough there, that would be very disruptive to, traditional ways of thinking about training and use of the technology. Although that feels a little bit further out, all right? So I wouldn't expect that to be an immediate deal. Oh, and by the way, where this stuff is made, all right? If we start to see any tensions between China and Taiwan and, their productive capacity, I think it's TSMC is the name of the company.
Right.
That's where all the stuff, that's the fab where all those NVIDIA chips are made, right? And if that got blockaded or so on and so forth, that would be very disruptive. So anyway, a lot of forces, and there are a lot of incumbents, right? For every Intel, there's an AMD, right? Historically, that pops up. And
yeah, but Kevin, I need to,
go ahead, jump in, Tim.
Well, I want to put perspective because I know them really well. And I met Jensen before he started NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And he was at another company that I was working. I was working with another graphics card company, and he was their competitor.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I got to know him pretty well. And before he started this, he actually shared with a few of us what he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I followed him pretty closely, and I've seen everything he's done. And one of the things to keep in mind about Jensen, he's probably one of the smartest guys in the room. If you walk, no matter where he walks in, he's one of the smartest guys. Two, he thinks 10 years ahead. He's one of the most forward-thinking guys I've ever met. And three, he thinks about everything he does in the context of building blocks. That this is going to, whatever he does here is going to beget this, and whatever he does here is going to beget that. And so when you ask the question of competition, remember, keep in mind, he's put into
Just watermelon is good.
Okay, hold on a
Yeah.
second. Go ahead, Tim.
He's put into a foundation, a scenario where he not only has already incredibly important IP at the hardware level, he ultimately did the same thing at the software level. I mean, if you look at CUDA and CUDA's acceptance in universities to create engineers who could write in CUDA, he already has an advantage over anybody else. So I would argue that, yes, Intel and AMD are both going to be serious competitors. They're going to create chips that follow suit. But at the moment, at least, Jensen continues to create incredibly powerful software links to anything he creates in hardware.
Mhm.
And you know, people don't understand how important his Omniverse architecture is. He's the first one who's created the ability to do what we call digital twins at a great level. And this is what, for example, Siemens used to actually create entire manufacturing facility in virtual reality before they even, laid groundwork for the physical building.
Yeah. So what you're suggesting, Tim, just to be, because you can amplify it in a second, is it's more than a chip maker. It's putting all the planks in place for it to be a pretty powerful platform, right?
Yes. And as I said, the way he thinks is a little bit different. And for example, in the case of Intel, they've always had the hardware side of it, but they have to rely on third-party guys to boost what they're doing in software. AMD's in a similar case. And by the way, this is really interesting because Lisa Su of AMD and Jensen are actually cousins.
Mhm.
And there's a healthy, let's say, competition between the two of them that's always been going on. But I'm just responding to your question that there'll always be competitors, even some smaller guys. But all of them are going to have trouble getting to the level where he is, where not only does he have hardware, software, and now he's got services, he is ahead of them in the sense of thinking what next he's got to do to expand it. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be third parties that can get the similar software support. And Intel's going out and looking at buying companies to do software for the next generation of especially their NPUs, as well as AMD, who this morning just bought a Finnish company for $665 million that does AI software that would enhance what AMD's doing in this.
Right.
My only point is that he thinks so far ahead that if the competitors are coming up to meet him, he's going to jump 2 steps ahead of them going forward.
Yeah, I would just echo what you're saying about his, that he's a formidable presence and a smart guy. That, one of the people that we've seen on the call, Jim Sporer, is, Jensen's a neighbor, right? And he's spoken very highly of him in the past. So, I mean, that's over a very long period of time. So I accept that at face value, having never met the man, but I know I trust Jim. And I trust you, Tim. So
I mean, he's a good guy. And he's also one of the most personable CEOs you can ever meet.
well, that's a good thing. We will take highly human in this space. All right, probably a good
Tim?
characteristic to have. Go ahead.
Tim, I was curious, because I don't watch the chip sector that closely, but do you see, will fabs that AMD has developed for existing chipsets and architectures, are those, can those be upgraded or shifted, or are competitors looking at having to also build new fabs for these new chips and chipsets?
Yeah, AMD and those guys cannot afford to do fabs. They use TSMC the same way.
Yeah.
Right.
They just have to argue for
Inventory or
space.
space on the line. Right.
Yeah, and because at this point, Nvidia, actually to be we know this pretty well. TSMC is basically going to be busy the next 5 years just by the business that they get from Apple and Nvidia.
Yeah.
And then Intel is even using TSMC for certain things on their NPU and their high-end stuff. And you know, the bottom line is that TSMC is in fact, it looks like Apple's going to be the first one to get the chips on the 2 nanometer by next year. But TSMC is maxed out. Now, to be fair,
Right.
TSMC is building a new facility in Arizona, and that's moving along pretty quick. That I believe that's going to come online in late 25 or early 26. It's going to help to some degree. But it's unclear to me if they're going to if the Phoenix event facility is going to have the ability with the equipment to do the most powerful, 2 nanometers going forward.
Jim, do you see, we've seen a lot of economic vitality in Mexico, right? As another place for, the assembly and so on and so forth. Is there anything going on in Mexico relative to ideas for chip production south of the U.S. border?
No, not at the moment. It's all of it is really focused on the U.S. because of the CHIPS Act.
Okay.
And plus, if I don't know if you know much about the Mexican side, they mainly are they basically do more of the packaging and some of the other lightweight stuff. They don't really have it, and they don't have the
That's
money.
my observation too. I just wanted to see if you had any more.
Yeah, no, they don't have the money, and the government doesn't support them at all in the sense of backing, chip plants.
Okay. Good to know. I had no visibility to that. Doug, you sent a whole bunch of information prior to this call, so you've clearly been, dug into this too. What's your that's a double entendre, Doug.
Yeah.
So what's your perspective that you'd like to share this morning?
Yeah, so right now the price per earnings for Nvidia is high, right? So the question is, in the short run, with the, is there a bubble or not? In the long run, is it a good bet? I think in the long run, it's a good bet. The question is, will it go down before it goes back up, right? And I was just hearing, like for instance, Oracle Microsoft has a $5 billion deal to rent the new GB 200 chips out there, right? And there is Goldman Sachs put out I was just listening to a review of Goldman Sachs is talking about, is there an AI winter coming along, right? Are we getting the productivity gains that we're expecting? Will Nvidia slow down, because one is, the one thing about Goldman Sachs that I thought was useful is they looked at energy and AI. And so like even here in the United States, what's happening is people are, data centers are going out and buying up power from the utilities. And so will that drive up power for the consumers as well, right? So this will be interesting to see where power goes in. So bottom line is, I think the thing to track is, one is AI giving the bang for the buck in productivity? So do you continue to see that? Two are these data centers and like the Metas and the Amazons and so forth. Are they in this for the long run? And they say, okay, yeah, things may not be fast in the next 2 years, but we think in the next 5 years, 10 years, it'll be significant. So we're going to continue to double down on NVIDIA's chips, and so we'll continue to grow our data centers. Follow the energy and say, is there energy to power these? Because the these data center companies could have be buying all the chips they want, but there's no power to run the chips, and there won't be chips.
So there's an opening, Doug, in seeing an architectural shift from being power hungry to something that's more energy efficient in chips, right? That's one of the openings that I think is possible in the future. I don't really know which of the players is going to be good at that, but there's a new ex-IBM person that's sitting over at Applied Materials, where it seems to me that that's a something that is going to get explored, and we've seen it at a device level, right? That Qualcomm chips get integrated and they're less power hungry, right? But that doesn't scale up right at the moment. Also, after we train the large language models, we're going to have a lot of small language models that are going to get trained.
Yeah, and I
proliferation of those. Okay, that's a completely different animal. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, and then the question is how much is training and how much is inference, is running the models? I thought there was a 2-for-1. And I don't know, does anyone know off the top of their head if it's twice as much power needed for training versus inference? I don't know that. I need to do a search on that. But anyway,
I don't think it's not quite that
Right.
cut and dry. A lot of it has to do with the regional power supplies and capabilities. Gates is actually investing in what he calls small nuclear energy things, and is suggesting that in the future you would build your AI powers or AI inferencing backend systems next to or close
Closer
enough to where you tap into the energy from a nuclear facility.
Right, and they're doing that up in Chicago is a good example. Like they're building a $2 billion, Google is a $2 billion nuclear power plant or a data center because of nuclear power. They're charging, I think it's $90 a megawatt hour.
Yeah, and the fact is that there's, when you get close to the power, the transmission loss becomes negligible.
Correct. It's cheaper to build fiber optics than it is to build high power cables for power transmission.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're also going to start to see a split, the inference versus training thing. I think training requires more sophisticated chips. We're starting to see, you've got a company called Groq, GROQ, and there was a new chip announced 2 weeks ago called SOHU, SOHU, that are both specialized inference chips and designed specifically for the transformer model. So you're seeing specialization, and those are super efficient. Like Groq does 500 tokens a second. If you go to grok.com, you can actually experience it. It's pretty incredible. That SOHU chip, they're claiming 500,000 tokens a second in inference. So
wow,
just instant, whatever you need to create, bang, done. So I think specialization on the inference side is going to reduce power dramatically and increase speed and throughput dramatically. But those chips, as fast as they are, they don't do things like diffusion image generation, right? They're very specific to large language models. So as the models get more sophisticated and multimodal, these specialty chips are gonna, I think they'll fall into niches. So it's gonna be interesting to see. The other thing to reinforce what Tim was saying, NVIDIA's software is really where it's at. That's the big problem with AMD and Intel right now, is there's not the software to be able to scale it, and no one's using the software they're using. George Hotz is a innovator and he's created a company called Tiny Corp to create a standalone AI box where you can train and do inference locally. And he's been working for a year trying to get AMD chips even working. and he finally made a breakthrough in software, but basically had to write around AMD's software to be able to be able to do this stuff. So how these companies got so far behind is staggering to me. I mean, it sounds like, you know, Jensen is way ahead, but also I just feel like these major chip companies just ceded the game, you know, the GPU market to Nvidia. Like, yeah, they let them do the game thing, and you know, it's
Well,
that.
I mean,
Well, but
it sounds like
remember, I
Go
was gonna
ahead.
say the problem with the Intel case and getting behind it was the bad choices of CEOs they had over the last 10 years.
Yeah,
Right.
That that hobbled them because they took their eye off the ball on multiple things, including next generation process technology. And in this particular case, you know, Pat Gelsinger, who I've known since he was Andy Grove's assistant, is actually has always been one of the smartest guys they've had there anyway, and he was destined for something like this. And he's now correcting a lot of that, but he's got so much stuff to deal with
Right.
that was done bad in the past, that playing catch up is a really difficult thing for Intel to come up to anything close to what Nvidia is doing.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
is
it's the same problem that I, basically whispered into the ears of General Electric before it started to decline, is that, too many financial engineering missteps, right? I'm going to refer you back to the episode about Boeing, if you'd like to, tune into that. The one thing that I would say as a business strategist is, what I would say to Jensen, if I were in a coffee table discussion, is, yeah, you want to be able to build the ecosystem around you, as opposed to becoming, a definitional monopoly, because you will attract the wrong kind of regulatory interest. So what you want to be able to do is walk up to that threshold, but not walk over it, right? And be able to have a whole bunch of other things happening that are, beneficial to the ecosystem that you're trying to create. Mike?
Yeah, I guess it's slightly different than what I was mentioning before, but I mean, even Sohu has their chips built by Taiwan Semiconductor, right, Tim? And has there not been a concurrent stream of investing momentum behind new chip fabs, or do people just think those are too expensive, they're too hard to put up? I would have thought in the last 6 months there'd be a run, a bonanza on terms of building fabs. Somebody
Well,
other than TSMC.
There are. I mean, Intel's got three new fabs going up in
One or two's in Arizona, right? Or three.
yeah, yeah. Samsung has a new one going up in Texas. Samsung, of course, is trying to do something similar with the next generation process.
Mhm.
But at the moment, TSMC again is just so light years ahead of some of these guys in the next generation. Even that even Intel is having to go to them for 3 nanometer, and and if they are going to shift to 2 nanometer, because the factories that Intel is building right now is not going to be able to handle, at least at the moment. I think that the factories, when they launch, are going to be 5 nanometer, and then they'll scale down afterwards.
yeah. There's also a supply chain thing, as far as I understand it, that TSMC has the supply chain locked. That it's, you know, even if you can do the assembly, getting all the components to do the assembly is a completely different story, and they've apparently got that fairly locked. So I don't think it's just
and
about
they
the
have,
capacity.
the attention of the Nordics, in terms of, creating the next generation of fabs that they want to install. All right, so they have some control over the specs. Okay, and that's like reaching up into, understanding, the insurance industry through the lens of reinsurance. Okay, the people who are insuring the insurers, all right, gives you a different point of view about, all right, what's actually happening. All right, and how they get capitalized and invest. So, other thoughts, Suzanne? Any anything sparking in your imagination in terms of because you're coming at this more from the bio defense point of view.
Yeah. Well, I'm just watching the market really closely and definitely getting more into opening up more into the investments and I've been yesterday. I spent a good portion of the day looking into ARC and with Kathy Woods, and looking at all the connections there that she has and what she's doing with bio. It's like Peter and Paul. It's following, and the chip makers. And I just recently read a report yesterday that Singapore is going to be a real huge player coming up here, particularly with AI. And I think that's really important to watch.
Do you see any bio hybrid stuff in the pipeline?
Just well, I'm part of the Paul Warbush group, Requisite Q, and with Quantum, and with major bio applications with their patent. So, I'm working on that project right now with them and looking at, expanding some of their applications in bio. Other than D-Wave and AlphaFold 3, I'm following really closely what, of course, these companies are doing with sequencing and where this involves the manufacturing process with materials and the chips. So it's just putting all the pieces together. So I've been working really hard this week on this, and I'll have more to report. But it's so exciting in healthcare. I think that's going to be a huge transformation, of course. I think Doug might have some add-on on this one.
Yeah, clearly Doug is up to his hip boots in.
I watch Doug closely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, in fact, Harvey Castro is going to be on the podcast that Tim is going to be hosts. And so looking forward to that podcast. And yeah, AI in healthcare is something that's going to be very interesting to track on, it's a $4.3 trillion business going to $7 trillion here in the United States. And the question is, can AI move the needle to reduce it? Unfortunately, our life expectancy has gone down by a couple of years. So we're spending more money on healthcare, and we're having less quality health.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean,
Doug, you just listed a book on here that's very important. China's Rise, Russia's Invasion, and America's Struggle to Defend the West by David Sanger. And what happens to Nvidia? And you asked the question, what happens to Nvidia stock if China invades Taiwan? Let me just point out one key thing that our sources are telling us, because I deal with all the manufacturers who tap into not only TSMC but to the manufacturing that goes on in Taiwan and China. And there are significant political safeguards going into place around TSMC that should China even be successful with something like an invasion, that would protect TSMC from China getting hold of that factory. And secondly, this is one of the reasons the TSMC is doing their two of the other factories, not only the one here, but there's one in Germany, and I think there's one other one that's being proposed I think it's in Vietnam. But they're going to make it possible to transfer the IP that they're doing with what's really being done in Taiwan at the moment to some of their new factories going forward. And then there's a kill switch, from what I've read, that should the Chinese take over TSMC, that would disable the advanced technology capabilities that TSMC has, so that China could not have access to it.
That's Tim, you just moved from a speculative fiction to reality, right? Because I had, thought those thoughts, but not, never heard anyone confirm that there was something like that underway. The resilience, yes, the stance, right, of being in multiple markets so that, invasion would not cause, the entire TSMC, production capability to collapse. Yeah, was readily apparent. The kill switch, that's new. Hey, that's a whole, espionage novel right there, right? Write it.
Well, that's what the
Good
Swiss
reading.
did in World War II. They made it, they had explosives to all their bridges. So it's like, okay, if Nazi Germany invades, we're going to blow up all of our transportation system.
Yeah. By the way, Tim, you'll remember that in a much earlier era, I had lots of conversations with David Sanger when his primary focus was covering IBM, during the antitrust era. So,
By the way, I know David, and spent time with him.
Yeah.
He's actually from the standpoint of he's in the class of John Markoff. He's one of the most
Mhm.
brilliant
Yes.
journalists and writers I've ever met in my life.
Yeah, he's remarkable. Although there was always some trepidation, conversations with him were as I said, you were asking the right question again, David. So he was quite good at and always has been good at what he does.
Yeah, I'm just finishing up the Cold War book, and I just finished The Perfect Weapon,
Mhm.
War Sabotage and the Fear in the Cyber Age. So that's another one. And then Army of None is another book. So maybe I'm getting too paranoid about what's going on. But though 2024 is not a good time for warfare, right? And our world is getting much more dangerous, right? And so what's going to happen? But I guess, Tim, to your point is, do you make it so painful for China to invade Taiwan that even if they want to, they can't, right? It would just take down their economy.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it would have economic disaster across the world because
Right.
Taiwan is so significant about a lot of other things. And that's why, the US has done so much to try to make sure that China doesn't do this. And the problem with China, of course, is they believe that it's theirs, and they eventually are going to figure a way to take it over. You just got to, the goal now is to keep them as much as possible away from a type of invasion, as long as possible. Because ultimately, I don't think decades from now, I think China could probably do that. But in the meantime, you put up all of these fail-safe things, new factories, new things that China that is in that Taiwan supplies. I don't know. It's a really tough one. We study that pretty closely for our customers who, are taking all of their manufacturing out of China, and they've moved a lot of it over to Vietnam and Malaysia. And they're not even moving anything into Taiwan at the moment. All the new factories are outside of Taiwan.
Understood.
Hey, you guys, what do you think of factory AI? Have you looked into that?
Unpack what does that mean, Susan?
Factory AI. They're a software company out of Sydney.
Okay, it's a company. Okay,
Factory AI. Wes
I
Roth.
don't know anything about it. Anybody know anything about it?
Doug, have you heard about them?
I have not.
Okay, check that out. It's pretty amazing.
Put it in the chat, Suzanne.
Yeah.
Have a link,
Okay.
please
Right.
share it with
I'm
us.
looking it up right now.
Jemay, you're on camera. We're delighted to have you with us. Any thoughts occurring to you as you join us, likely from Denver today?
Hello. No, just fascinated trying to figure this out. We're applying for a grant where we would use AI tools and technology to train people to work for Santa Fe County in the city. And Microsoft is saying they want to donate their AI, and Google, and I mean, and as a previous stockbroker, unfortunately, I didn't invest in Nvidia. I wish I would have, but I'm just listening.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us. We're
Yeah.
delighted to have that you're
Thank you.
probably post unboxing, meaning
That's
taking.
right. Of course, I'm getting ready to go to Ireland, but I'll
Well,
be
we'll
back.
catch up.
Yeah.
I see, not on camera, but I saw in comments, Maylin had a comment, talking about rent. Maylin, do you want to expand on that thought? And if not, we're glad that you're with us. Anybody else, want to, give us some perspective? Rob, you're on camera now. What are you thinking?
Yeah, sorry, I was late to class, so I tried to sneak in through the back and not be noticed by people. So apologies for being late. And apologies if this was discussed already, but in the context of, the bubble, right? This AI arms race does seem unprecedented, even in the context of other historical technology bubbles. And obviously the folks on this call have some great historical perspective, but I'm just wondering, do you guys feel that this is kind of unprecedented in the context of what we've seen throughout the history of the tech bubbles? And what does that mean in terms of when the bubble bursts? Because all bubbles burst eventually, right? Is the risk for backlash against how companies are investing in AI, how they're deploying it, how they're using it? Is the risk higher to that the backlash cycle, when it inevitably comes, is going to be something equally as unprecedented as the increase of the bubble that we're seeing? I don't know
Well,
if that makes any sense, if
I'll
I
address
articulated that at all, but
no, I'll address the bubble issue in the sense that yes, there is a bubble of similar to the internet bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s, in that you've got a lot of players that are coming in who are basically identifying that they're doing something in AI. Some of them are funded okay. Most of them are startups that doesn't really have, the kind of backing. Any of those that actually have anything really significant are going to be bought by someone else. I don't think the amount of money needed to take a startup to becoming a blockbuster AI company is going to be very, very difficult. In the context of the backlash, yeah, you're going to see it. You're going to see it in the stock market to some degree, and you've already seen it where they're saying that some companies are over invested, et cetera. I don't believe that's the case in Nvidia. I think Nvidia's got a much longer runway. I think both Intel and AMD are going to make strides to be competitive, but they'll always be behind because Nvidia is just so smart and has such an infrastructure in place of hardware, software, and services that they'll at least stay 1 or 2 steps ahead of everybody, at least for the next 3 to 5 years. And I do think, though, the bigger threat to me, and it's always been for AI, is in relationship to this kind of a mantra. And I've been dealing with this in Silicon Valley for 35 years, and it's, we're going to make it. Who cares what it can do? Good or bad. And there's this mentality that says, and I dealt with this at the engineering level when I was working at Park. We're going to create this, period. And then it's up to you to figure out whether it's good or bad or what you can do with it. And that mentality behind that engineering thinking has always been a very, very big problem. So that when you look at now AI, yes, you can see a lot of things that it could be used for good. But boy, you can see a lot of things that are going to use to be for bad. And I think it's that where you're going to see the blowback is AI's application, in uh, well, in fact, we saw it already yesterday where the US took down a big Russian bot who was creating, millions of tweets and
Yep.
and social media with just false information about the election. And they were all, by the way, driven by AI. The material was AI driven. So yeah, I think the blowback's going to be more from the stand of security, keeping kids safe, and then false information.
Well,
And go ahead,
Go ahead,
Mike.
Tim.
I'm sorry.
no.
Well,
Okay.
and
I
keep,
was. You go
and
ahead.
keeping kids safe.
Well, I think we have to add environment to that, Rob. I was, it was a great question because I was, I was trying to think back from late '80s, right, till now. When and Tim and I used to do a lot of this with our various forecasts. People always wanted to see a number. What they really wanted were your assumptions that went into the forecast model. I'm trying to remember if we ever had a moment where it was like, okay, we need to assess environmental and geopolitical, right? With so much of technology, obviously a lot of what we deal with today came out of things like DARPA, but it always strikes me the last 50 years, tech advanced in a vacuum, right? It never had to concern itself too much with these other external factors. It was always about employment rates, literacy of a given marketplace. It's going to drive, the consumers to buy, invest in PCs because they want to improve their own lives and their kids, and then they wanted entertainment, etc. None of those that I recall, we spend. It was always, in my case, at places I worked, we'd go to the head economist who would give us these kind of large global patterns. I'm trying to remember. I don't think we ever really sat there and said the external forces of a deteriorating global environment, literally the environment, and that those in terms of it impacting a market or a technology's evolution. If it was always
Probably,
a minor element.
I think probably the closest corollary would be the emergence of the web, right? And everybody freaking out about how kids were going to be exposed to pornography and pedophiles and all that stuff that they didn't have exposure to before. So that's probably the closest. But yeah, it's a whole. There's so much more potential impact on society than than the launch of the iPhone was, right? So it'll be interesting to see what kind of blowback we eventually get when something really bad happens at some point.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I think that one of the ways to think about this, if you're looking at puts and takes, right? Because Mike, you're right. Environmental, geopolitical, those are new. Is looking at adjacencies. There's the core thematic of what's driving investment right now, but then you have a lot of things that are in that ecosystem that are worth considering. We've talked about energy during this call. Well, I mean, advancement in production of energy, co-location, right, and all the things that go along with that. I mean, I remember when we used to build IBM sites, we had cogeneration plants right on site with a railroad spur so that you would be able to, burn multiple kinds of fuel to make, what you needed to be resilient. If the grid went down, who cares? All right, we're up and running, and increasingly that's going to be a point of view. I think, while it's a little bit further out, we're making progress, toward fusion. All right, you see, that will be a big jump, all right, going from fission to fusion. If we can put little versions of the sun, right here on Earth, but we'll see. All right, but I think that looking at the adjacencies, I think that there's a great cottage business to be had for the small language models in terms of data training set, right? And being able to understand the data and having it ready, right, for this stuff. There's a lot of data that is sitting inside of enterprises, organizations, governments that isn't ready, right, for this, and preparing it in a way so that it can be used, right. that's going to be a great business by itself. And that's a service business as opposed to a chip business or
But
software business. Go
Kevin,
ahead.
it's not necessarily a service business as much as it is, and we're advising the big corporations that we're dealing with who are not into this. We're advising them to set up and behind the firewall their own AI networks and servers to inference just their data. Because
100%.
one of the
But that only
one of the
moves you
bigger
forward, with what you're creating now. It doesn't go and get all the historical stuff. That has to be formatted or
well,
ingested in
but
some
you're right. But
way.
again, if you've got, let's say you have your own internal, an enterprise has their own internal AI servers that has the H400 or the Gemini from Nvidia in there, and you begin inferencing your data across every one of your silos, as well as historical data. It may take time. In most of these cases, it would take weeks, even if you had high-powered servers, and depending on the size of the company. But once you do that, you have accessibility to all of your data that can be cross-referenced against to generic generative AI data if you need to. But the reason I'm actually advising this to most of these major corporations we're dealing with has more to do with keeping their data behind the firewall and never letting it get out of the firewall.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that there's there's another envelope around that, which is, and I was just talking about this, to a group, and delivering a keynote, right, for a services conference, is, there's stuff that you want to keep inside your domain, but there's other stuff that you're going to want to have in a data cooperative, right? Because it's useful at an industry or a sector level for you to have some common understandings of how you want to approach things as an industry. And so that there's a delicate balance between what you hold on to as trade secrets, internal intellectual property, and what you share to create common good between those economic actors and their customers and clients, right? And so organizations like IEEE and so on and so forth do a great job as being in between spaces, right, for that kind of stuff. Mike, any closing thoughts as we come up to the top of the hour? Any reframing that you want to do?
I don't know if I'd say reframing, but I think, the thing I've been trying to pay more attention to is this, again, these new kind of forces that when you're looking at evolving markets and technologies, these two new factors of environment and geopolitics writ large, I think is, at risk of kind of beating that to death. If that's all we talk about, I think that should be maybe one of the things I've been putting in my kind of, daily searches is new information. And Doug provides so much on that space in terms of energy demands, and what that's going to mean. I think those are going to be things we probably need to just continually keep an eye on. I mean, it's hard to, track what's going to happen geopolitically. I mean, I think I can't see who in the comments, we covered off on that notion of, the larger question of, does China really want to go after TSMC, or rather Taiwan? Sorry, that was not a Freudian slip. That is going to be just something that's, again, something that's going to be very interesting to track those factors as we move forward. And I think, the other one, if you recall, I think there's, we've seen the reports of, how much both the internet and associated technologies contribute to global warming. It's a substantial amount. And I think, as we look at some of these smaller approaches and very focused AI models, I think it'll be interesting to see how do we see businesses and consumers opt for kind of the approach that Apple has that maybe have slightly less negative impacts on the environment over the long term, but we'll see. And I just think that, I think especially with, is it Generation Alpha? It's after, the millennials, the millennials kids
Right.
are Generation Alpha.
After Z is alphas.
And they tend to sample quite high on their concerns about the environment relative to technology. So I think it'll be interesting to track that cohort,
I
as
mean,
they say.
yeah, we're going through the same protocol the National Weather Service does for naming storms and stuff. You know, we got to the end of the alphabet. Now we're going back to the beginning, right? So, will the
Yeah.
betas and, you know, others, you know, follow? We shall see, all right? Depends on what the social scientists name the cohorts.
Yeah, a good example is CO2 emissions by Google has risen in just the last year 13%. And from 2017, it's jumped by a factor of 4x. So, you know, I think what you're going to see is a lot of these, you know, companies going after nuclear. The problem with solar and wind is that when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, you don't get any, you're
But,
not
you know,
doing any greening.
it's interesting that some of the crypto, I mean, I'll just take the crypto bros as kind of a, you know, early, you know, canary, you know, needs a lot of processing power and ongoing. They went to places that had low energy costs, like you know, they have
Iceland.
geothermal, all right?
Yeah.
So, you know, Iceland, you know, was a, you know, dandy for, you know, a lot of those, because it was, oh, look, you know, we can get, you know, cheap electricity. It's an okay, you know, quality of life. We don't need to have a big staff. We just need a lot of computers whizzing around in a dark space. Okay. And so those places are beginning to, you know, attract, you know, capital, right, in ways that we'll just say less likely suspects, right?
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting, and I'll continue to be looking at that, because those are unique
Yeah.
situations. You know, where will those little islands of competence begin to pop up? I'm kind of less interested in crypto, more interested in getting my questions answered by AI, but you know, they're both demanding a lot of computing power.
Yeah, the interesting thing is where there's a lot of build out is in Northern Virginia. It's under construction of data centers.
Yeah, but there's a different reason for that, as you might well imagine.
Yeah, but that's
why would Reston, Virginia want a lot of computing power?
Yeah.
How many layers underground that we can't see of things that are going on, right, in and around DC, right? One, you know, can only imagine. All right.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here for just a
Sure,
second.
go ahead.
I had a fairly lengthy conversation yesterday with a friend who his company, and he's one of the owners of the company, they are building these data centers. And you know, and so the discussion came up about these small nuclear reactors. And he's very knowledgeable about what's going on in that particular industry. And he said that they are really looking at the small nuclear reactors as being 10 years out to solve some of these power supply problems.
Yeah, I mean, in reality, the reason that we have difficulty with nuclear power, from my perspective, and there's a lot of documentation to support this, is that we chose a particular type of fission reactor, you know, breeder reactors, because we wanted material to make nuclear bombs. Okay, and if you design, you know, nuclear a different way, it's pretty safe, you know, relative to other, you know, kinds of technologies. The one's a little bit more science fiction, but, you know, there's, you know, continues to be, you know, research on it, are thorium reactors, all right? And, you know, that's a fairly abundant, you know, source if you can make it work. So at any rate, I like what you're saying. Scaling this stuff down to be closer to the actual need, all right, as opposed to building something big and distributing it, we lose so much energy through distribution. So getting the, you know, production closer to, you know, the use case creates a different efficiency that's really useful, right? And that's just
Yeah.
physics.
Yeah, he also said, and I think it was Doug that mentioned it, that fiber optics really sort of damper that need, that that fiber optics
Yeah.
doesn't, it's such that it doesn't make it that necessary to build right at the plant. Now, I don't know anything
Yeah.
more than what he told me.
Yeah, I mean, the early model for what's being discussed here, which is creating smaller production that is put into a grid, is, you know, Germany. Germany is doing a pretty good job of doing this at a city and village level, and then interconnecting them for resilience. So it's possible. They still have some big plants that are necessary to support their heavy manufacturing, but in terms of living electricity, it's a lot more distributed. All right, well, we're at the top of the hour. Interesting discussion. Like we didn't answer the question, nor did we want to answer the question about bubble, but guess what? I think we came to the conclusions that Jensen running NVIDIA is a pretty smart guy. There are a lot of market forces underway. There are a lot of adjacencies, and it's just a lot to continue to pay attention to. And for people like Tim, it continues to pay the bills, all right? Because all of that advice and counsel is worthwhile, all right? Thanks so much for joining today, and everything you do, be intentional and ask better questions. We'll talk to you next week. Cheers.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Bye.
Like,